Okay, we're going to begin with a little meditation as we do usually. So make yourself comfortable. Relax your body, relax your mind. And just yesterday mentioning to another student the sense of relaxing your mind. Initially you can think, anything else that I'm thinking of that comes to my mind right now other than meditation, I can address later. I don't have to think about anything else right now. So bring your attention to observing your respiration without controlling it. Recognizing when you're breathing in, when you're breathing out. If you find that relatively easy, you can add another factor to keep your mind occupied, to count the breaths. So for instance, you might be thinking, now this is the first inhalation. As it changes direction and just begins to change, this is the first exhalation. So the inhalation and exhalation counted as one cycle. And then at the end of the exhalation, thinking this is the beginning of the second inhalation. You can either say the sounds mentally, the names of the numbers, or you can imagine like one of those calendars that have different numbers on them that flip down. You can imagine the number as a visual image in your mind. So this is to keep your mind occupied with two objects, so there's no room left for you to get involved with other multitasking ideas or thoughts or worries. So begin. Hopefully your mind is a little bit calmed. The thoughts that you were occupied with before, a little bit subdued. Now follow one breath in your nostrils, up your nostrils, as though it were going to the crown of your head, to your throat, to your heart chakra. Just leave your attention in that area, and with part of the mind, observe the nature of your consciousness. It's not something that you see with your eyes. It's not an object of eyesight, so it doesn't have a shape or color. But it's sometimes compared to space. It's unobstructing to the thoughts. It's clear and knowing. Try to get a mental image of this, a sense of this in between the thoughts, even when the thoughts are present, thinking of them as like waves on the surface of a body of water, having different aspect than the water itself, but merging back into it when the waves subside. As the thoughts disappear, they disappear back into the nature of the mind. When they arise out of the nature of the mind. Once you get a glimpse of that spaciousness of the mind, its unobstructing nature rather, how it acts in a sense like a mirror, reflective, whatever presents itself to the mind arises in the nature of that. Once you get a glimpse of that, try to hold it with the glue of mindfulness, or the magnet of mindfulness. Thoughts arise disturbing you from that, rather than thinking of them as obstacles. Try to integrate them into your meditation by using them to reaffirm the nature of the mind. The mind allows them to arise, to emerge from its nature, and they dissolve back into that. Recognize what you're developing is a sense or mental image of the nature of the mind. We're not yet directly perceiving it, but that mental image is based on experience and hopefully becoming more and more factually correct, factually concordant. Occasionally let go of that mental image also and try to sense the nature of the mind within which that mental image is arising, as though to get yet more fine perception of the mind, a finer mental image of the mind. Some sense of this all-encompassing appearance to your consciousness of the mind's nature, transparent, not with no shape or color, no boundaries, unobstructing, knowing, within this clear state of mind, ask yourself, who is meditating? A slight difference between what is appearing, what is being known, and the sense of the I. I seems to be something that is owning or possessing the perception of the I, sort of directing it, directing the perception of the consciousness. See if you can identify how this sense of self or I is appearing to your mind. It's not appearing as a shape, like the shape of your body. Not localized to some point within your perceptual field. Just a general sense of the I existing on its own. As though introducing a little fish into a calm pool of water. Introduce into your mind the little factor of analysis without disturbing the calmness of the clarity of your mind. Just investigate how this sense of self presents itself to the mind, to the consciousness. If that disturbs your clarity and you've lost the sense of the calmness of the mind, the spaciousness, let go again and again. Go back to that sense of the clear light nature of your mind. And again, let the sense of I arise and investigate it. This sense of I is not identified. One doesn't see it as being the body, nor the mind itself. It seems to be something independently established, existing from its own side. Not totally clear. but seemingly definitely there. With a little fish of analysis, see if you can also notice how the main part of the mind is reacting to this appearance of the I. Is there any factor within the mind that's rejecting this I, or does it accept it? If you check, analyze, investigate closely, there's nothing within the mind that seems to be negating the existence of this, as though saying to yourself, this is just an illusion, this doesn't exist. The mind is going along with this appearance. We could say assenting to it, holding it, as though the appearance of the I actually referred to something actually existing. The conceived object of that appearance. As though it existed as an inherently existent phenomenon. If that conceived object, that sense of I, existed the way that it appears to the consciousness, as though existing from its own side, self-supporting, inherently existent, it would have to be either inherently identical to the aggregates, in other words, inherently one with the aggregates, or it would have to be by its very nature inherently different than the aggregates. If any two things exist, they either have to be one or different. In this case, if something appears to be inherently existent, such as this I, it would have to be inherently one or inherently different from some other phenomena, such as the aggregates. If it were inherently different than the aggregates, it would have nothing to do with them at all. If you were stung by a mosquito or bee, the self would not necessarily think, I have been stung. Because it would be inherently different than the aggregates. As though observing someone else in a crowd of people being stung by a bee. Wouldn't be the thought, I. If this appearance to the mind of an I, and conceived to be an I, inherently existing, if that conceived object, inherently existent I, was inherently one with the aggregates, it would have to be utterly one in every way. It would have to be identical. But as the collection of aggregates are multiple, there are 5 aggregates, there would have to be 5 eyes, 5 selves, which we don't perceive. We perceive just one. Or we would have to say that instead of being 5 aggregates, the self was one of them. But we know from our experience, the self is not identical to the body, the feelings, discriminations, compositional factors. Maybe it's identical to the mind itself. But the sense of I as existing from its own side, as though inherently existing, is something that doesn't seem to have parts as the mind does. The mind has virtuous moments, virtuous instances, parts, non-virtuous parts, has primary mind, secondary mind. Although appearing from its own side, if you were to analyze in this way, it couldn't be inherently one with the aggregates, nor inherently different than the aggregates. For that conceived object, this sense of I, an inherently existent I, to exist, it would have to be inherently one or inherently different than the aggregates. Letting that dawn on you, that logic, that reasoning, well, if it's not one with the aggregates, inherently one with the aggregates, it's not inherently different than the aggregates, therefore it does not exist. Go over that logical reasoning again in your mind. If this conceived object of the appearance of I to my mind, the supposed existence of an I that seems to be there, that I'm conceiving of, if it were existing inherently from its own side, not just a label, but something substantially existing from its own side, it would have to be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different than the aggregates. If it were inherently one with the aggregates, it would have to be utterly one with them in every way. As there are 5 aggregates, there would have to be 5 cells. Or if we think it's actually only one of the aggregates, centering on the mental consciousness, it would have to be one with the mental consciousness. But then there would not be a sense of I at all related to the form, the body. When your body was hot, you wouldn't think, I am hot. The sense of the inherently existent I also is not inherently different than the aggregates, in which case it would have no relationship to the aggregates whatsoever. Say to yourself that this sense of an inherently existent I does not exist because it is not inherently one with the aggregates. It's not inherently different than the aggregates. The sense of self that we have held since birth, always in the background, never clearly delineated, but always accepted, always grasped to, assented to, that's brought us into all sorts of problems of this lifetime, still binds us to cyclic existence. This I that we've believed in does not exist in the way that it appears as inherently existent. Let go of that. See if you can experience a certain sense of relief. The I that you may recall having done negative actions does not exist at all in the way that you have conceived it. If you get a sense of that total lack of the I, let that be your only object, that mere vacuity, the lack of an inherently existing I. Then think, the ability to have the opportunity to meditate on something like this comes about because of having this life of leisure and endowment that I have right now, a human being. It's impermanent. I'm going to have to leave this life at some point. I'll die. Until then, I can try to make use of this opportunity that presents itself to practice the Dharma with this life, the only thing that will carry on into the future. I have to leave this body, all my possessions, all of my ordinary conception of myself disappears at the time of death. But the imprints that I can leave in the mind of developing wisdom, those imprints will appear in the future. It's what we call innate sense of wisdom, innate wisdom, connate. I think in order to pursue this, to leave an imprint in my mind, to heal myself this lifetime and in future, to be less a problem for others, to actually become eventually beneficial for others. I'm going to listen to the explanations this morning and this afternoon on the Madhyamaka view of reality. With the end aim of achieving enlightenment. That's my goal. Ultimate solution to my own problems, and as a perfect method to benefit others. In that state of enlightenment, I can spontaneously and effortlessly enact the welfare of others, lead them however long it takes out of their confusion into that same state of omniscience. So I'm going to participate, listen, contemplate, meditate in order to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. And relaxing your body, bring your attention back to the present. A few more non-inherently existent students have appeared since we started, out of the voidness of my mind. So, how was your meditation? Anyone at all clear? Jenny, how was your meditation? It's okay? The inscrutable Oriental. Difficult to get any reaction from everyone. Yes. Anyone who, yeah, okay. Some questions. She's got one behind you first.
When you say is the five aggregates, we are neither the same or different. The five aggregates, we are neither the same.
No.
We're neither one with the aggregates nor different.
Right. So introduce this logic without a lot of preparation. So if two things exist, let's say this rosary and this case for my eyeglasses, we say these two things exist. If two things exist, they either have to be identical or different. This is a general logical statement that you have to verify, first of all, You say, two things exist, either have to be the same or different. Could they be partially the same? Well, if they're partially the same, they're not the same. They're different, even if they were partially the same. This rosary and this eyeglass case, are they the same or different?
Different.
They're different, right? Is this bead on the rosary as one thing, and the rosary itself the same or different?
Different.
You can say same? Yeah, but it didn't say the same nature or the same meaning. Are they the same or different? So they're different. The bead and the rosary, two different things. So if you take, because the Buddha had explained that the person is somehow intimately related with these 5 skandhas, we call 5 aggregates or 5 heaps. The Indian word skandha kind of means like a pile, a heap, like a heap of trash. Do you use the word heap? No, okay, so or pile. If you were to divide the person up, you can't find anything else that relates to the person other than these 5 things: the body, the feelings, discrimination, a big pile called compositional factors that includes all of the other emotions and other important phenomena, and primary consciousness, the 6 primary consciousnesses: eye, ear, nose, tongue, taste, and mental consciousness. Other than that, there's nothing left. As though you took a car apart, put all the metal in one pile, and all the glass, all the petroleum products like the oil and gasoline in another. Maybe there's some wood in your car, another pile. You make all of these different piles. Is there some car left there? No, you've taken apart all the parts, components. So the Buddha said that we have components like this. And you could divide it into these 5 components, 5 skandhas. So we use that as the basis. We talk about, on one hand, the 5 skandhas that comprise the human person, the being, person. That supposedly you can't, when you discard all of these, there's nothing left. Somehow the person has to be related to these 5. And then we consider this sense of the self. I'm not talking about the self that does exist, the merely designated, merely imputed person. I'm talking about the sense of the self that's appearing to your ignorance, to your consciousness. Like in this meditation, we're trying to identify what's actually appearing to our mind and how the mind is reacting to that appearance. Okay, so that self that we begin to get a sense of when the mind has been calmed like this, meditating on the clarity of the mind, so other thoughts are subdued. There are 2 things that are happening. One is there's an appearance to the mind of the self. Just like right now, there's an appearance to my eye consciousness of people in this room. But there's also a mental reaction to that appearance. That is, does the mind believe that appearance of the eye? Even to an arhat, even to a bodhisattva who's realized emptiness, when they arise from that state, there still is this appearance of the eye. But for that person, to the arhat or to the bodhisattva who's realized emptiness, the appearance is understood to be like a reflection, like a mirage. It's somehow devoid of the meaning that seems to be there. But our mind is grasping to this appearance as though it really were there. We say the referent object is this appearance. The conceived object, what the mind is conceiving it to be, is really, really there, as though there was something really there. So we take that, that's the second phenomena. We take, on one hand, the five aggregates, and the other object that we're investigating, whether it exists, is this conceived object of the innermost ignorance, we could say. We could identify it that way, that's conceiving of the I. This sense of I seems to be one which is existing from its own side, inherently. So that's where we start. On one hand, the five aggregates, which we're familiar with, and now this sense of I that seems to be existing from its own side, inherently existent. We ask ourselves, are these two things the same or different? If they existed, they would have to be either the same or different. The same as this rosary and this watch case. If they exist, they have to be the same or different. In this case, they're different. There's some added factor here. When we talk about the sense of I, it has another feature to it. It seems to be existing inherently. So if this I were either the same or different than the aggregates, it would have to be inherently the same. It means from its very nature, it would have to be the same in each and every way as the aggregates, or it would have to be inherently different than the aggregates. So from its very nature, it would be something separate from the aggregates, having no relationship to them at all. We have to prepare ourselves for that meditation, we would have to do this kind of analysis. Then when you come down to comparing them, you use the logical consequences of that. If this sense of I were actually inherently different than the aggregates, because it seems to be inherently existing, it would have no relationship to the aggregates. When something happened to your body or mind, there would not be the thought, there would not be the feeling that I have experienced that. If it were inherently one, so that we can exclude that as a possibility. The sense of I, if it existed this way, could not exist as inherently different than the aggregates, because it would have no relationship. And we know that we know the sense of I. If someone were to abuse you, say harsh words to you, or if you would feel hot or stung by a mosquito or something, you think, I've been abused. You know, I am hot. I've been hurt. Whereas if this sense of inherently existent I really existed as one with the aggregates, it would have to be utterly one with the aggregates. It would have to be inherently one. As there are five aggregates, there would have to be five I's, five senses of self. Now, you have to, it's perplexing at first. Is that necessarily right? You have to prepare this analysis beforehand in all of these different ways. The main thing is to observe how this I exists, how it seems to exist. It's what's called the object of negation, right? How the mind is reacting to that ignorance, grasping to that. Anyway, this is just a little introduction to meditation on emptiness. Did anyone think they had some insight? Jeffrey, did you have insight? Oh, you could say.
This is not an insight, but when you ask us to think of the self in the five aggregates.
When I asked you to think of the what?
The self in the five aggregate. I felt that I was lost, like I'm missing.
Okay.
So there was an I, but the I got lost.
Right. Sometimes, when we're doing meditation like this, we might feel we have some insight. Maybe it's just a taste. It's just sort of probably we haven't had a deep insight, but just to think of in your mind this, having identified this sense of self as though it's existing from its own side, and to see how that has pervaded our experience from birth and in other lifetimes, whatever life we lived as an animal, an insect, a hell being, a ghost, a god, or human, we always had a sense of self that seemed to be the same as this. Not identical, like I am, certain name or something like that, but always had a sense of existing from its own side. But we never analyzed. We always accepted. And on the basis of that assent, accepting it, adhering to it, grasping to it as real, we developed all the rest of our delusions. Our anger, our attachment, our depression, our low self-esteem, our pride, our jealousy, all the problems of our life, all of the actions we engaged into that we might now regret later, negative actions, all of them came about because of this I. If that I never existed, one has at one's disposal an incredible sense of relief, as though all of that was a nightmare, all of that was a dream. And when you wake from a dream, you remember having the dream. It appeared. For a certain while you can remember it. For me, I can't. Almost like just a couple of seconds later, it starts to fade because I don't have that strength of familiarity with recalling the dream. But if you can remember the dream, it definitely appeared. It seemed so real at the time, but now it's okay. It was just a dream. The dreams might disturb you if they were nightmares or something, but you can think it was just a dream. In that way, when you have this sense of the emptiness of that I, you can recognize there was never a person who did these negative actions in the past in the way that my mind thought at the time. That itself is a great act of purification, to help to purify that negative karma that we've created, because we created it on the basis of belief, grasping to the sense of a real person. I've been abused. I must get this money. I must win the argument. I am right. All the I and all of those, the I and my, never existed, ever. It was just the thing that we were believing, like the water in the mirage, was never there. So even if you don't have an experience in meditation, just to understand that, have a sense of relief. That sense, even to have been told that this I doesn't exist the way that it appears. This is what the Buddha said, that itself can give us some confidence, some sense of relief. Okay, enough. So today we're continuing on this last part of introduction, presentation of Buddhist tenets. So we've talked about two of the Hinayana schools of tenets, the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika, right? Sautratika, like sutra, Sautranka, Sautrantika. Then last time we talked about the first of the Mahayana sets of tenets. The Buddha didn't use these words from the very beginning. These schools of thought of how to interpret the Buddhist teachings Some of them were there from the very beginning, like the 18 schools of the Vaibhashika, one of which is the Theravada, that was there from the beginning. But some of these other schools came about later, trying to interpret the Buddhist teachings. Like the Sautrantika was slightly different interpretation than the Vaibhashika of the Hinayana tenets. The Mahayana, it's said, was taught at the time the Buddha lived. The Mahayana Sutras were taught. Some of the hearers and the hearers attended those teachings. Maybe solitary realizers didn't, right? Usually they didn't want to be around when the Buddha gave teachings. That was one of their strong reasons for pursuing their particular way of practice. So in the Heart Sutra and other sutras, we sometimes have as participants some of the hearers, like Shariputra or others. And soon after that, the Mahayana disappeared as an active component in the life of Buddhism in the world. It seemed as though the teachings were held mainly by bodhisattvas, by tantric adepts, a little bit in isolation and so forth. And it remained that way for several hundred years until the Mahayana teachings were revived by the two great saints, Nagarjuna and Asanga. So I'm going to read a little bit from Jeffrey Hopkins' section on the Madhyamaka, so just to give a little bit background, and then we'll talk in more detail about the divisions and so forth. So this is from Jeffrey Hopkins' book, Meditation on Emptiness. If you like to try to check, it's starting about page 399 on the Madhyamika. So the two different words, Madhyamaka and Madhyamika. Madhyamaka generally refers to the system, the middle way system. A Madhyamika is a person who practices that system. So a little different emphasis on the syllables. Madhyamaka, Madhyamika. So in the Gelugpa monastic tradition in Tibet, so of the Tibetan traditions of Buddhism, we're not talking about the four schools, the tenets. We have, the Nyingma tradition, some of you are familiar with, the Sakya tradition, the Kagyu tradition, and the Gelugpa. Those are the main four traditions of Buddhism. So in the Gelugpa monastic tradition, the Madhyamika system, or Madhyamaka, was studied through textbooks written as commentaries mainly on two main texts. Chandrakirti was a great Indian Buddhist Mahayanist. He wrote a text called the Madhyamaka Avatara. And that's one of the texts that's mainly used, and different commentaries were written on it. The other text is Nagarjuna's middle way. It's just called the Madhyamaka. So the title refers to Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka Shastra and not to his other works. So generally in the Gelugpa tradition, when we study Madhyamaka, we're studying those texts and the Indian commentaries about them, and the Tibetan commentaries to those commentaries. So a whole set of things. But those are the main two texts that we take. There are many other texts written about the Madhyamaka, but those are the main ones. Almost everyone who considers themselves a Madhyamaka considers Nagarjuna's text as fundamental. The word Madhyamaka itself is formed from an Indian stem, Madhyama, Amadhya. The Indian word Madhya means middle. If you add an affix, M-A at the end, so it's Madhyama or Madhyama, that's a derivative noun that has the same meaning as its base. So that means, Madhyama means the very middle or the middlemost. One of the great commentators on the Madhyamaka, Bhavaviveka, derived the final suffix ka. We say Madhyama sort of means middlemost or middle, the very middle. He derived the ka suffix as from the verbal root for to proclaim. So the Madhyamaka, he said, means that which proclaims the middle. That is, either a person or a system of tenets or treatise that propounds the middle. So Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way is sometimes just called the Madhyamaka. Sometimes it's called the Madhyamaka treatise, Shastra, Madhyamaka Shastra. So it extensively teaches both emptiness, the profound side of the teachings, and the extensive varieties of spiritual paths. Generally, when we talk about the practice, we talk about, on one side, wisdom, the wisdom side, or the profound wisdom, and we talk about the method side, the extensive activities that deal with conventional reality. So you can talk about wisdom and method, or you can talk about the profound and extensive. When we talk about the merit tree, like this tanka up here of Lama Tsongkhapa, you see on either side at the top, there are two groups sort of floating up in space there. On Lama Tsongkhapa's right are said to be the lineage of what? You know? On the tanka, to Lama Tsongkhapa's right, so as we look at the tanka, on the left, it's said to be, on our left, Lama Tsongkhapa's right, we say the lineage of extensive deeds, or the method lineage. On his right, usually the right hand is associated in Buddhism with the conventional, with the extensive deeds, with conventional reality. On his left, to our right, is the lineage of the profound, the wisdom lineage, starting with Nagarjuna, starting with Manjushri to Nagarjuna and so forth. So sometimes when I use my hands, I use the left to refer to wisdom and wisdom lineage, and the extensive deeds, and the right, the method side. So what that means is method mainly deals with conventional reality. How do we deal with conventional reality? We practice the Bodhisattva deeds, the perfections. How do we deal with the ultimate nature of phenomena, emptiness? We use wisdom, and we develop insight into that. But the two of them have to be practiced in unison, method and wisdom, right? So Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way, this main source of the Madhyamaka, extensively teaches still today, both the profound emptiness and the extensive varieties of spiritual paths. So that means the extensive deeds, telling how the bodhisattvas practice, and using those as the basis to talk about emptiness, as the Buddha's Perfection of Wisdom Sutras did. Nagarjuna's text delineates reasonings that establish an emptiness of inherent existence as the final mode of existence of all phenomena. He gives many, many reasons, not with just one or a few but many examples and through many approaches in its 27 chapters. So I'm paraphrasing what Jeffrey's saying here, just to give us a background of where the Madhyamaka came from. The Buddha himself used the word the middle way in his teachings. He referred to it in many different ways. Sometimes we think of the middle way or the madhyama as like a moderation between extremes of asceticism and sensual indulgence. You know, like he gave up his princely life, went to the other extreme of ascetic behavior, finally settled on a middle way, you know, using food and so forth as medicine, and rather than just the way that we ordinarily use our, you know, the things that we encounter. But when the Buddha talked about the middle way, he was referring to this final view of reality. So why is it called the middle way? Because it's our minds tend to go to one extreme or another, that things either really exist the way they appear. The way they appear is as though they were findable somewhere in their parts as inherently existent. We either think that, or we can fall into another extreme that phenomena in somehow either don't exist at all, this is all an illusion, or in some way we denigrate something which is really conventionally there. So we fall into these two extremes. We affirm, we believe something that doesn't exist, what we call, we superimpose something that's not really there, or we denigrate something which is there. Those are the two extremes, superimposition or a kind of a denigration of some conventional quality which really is to be accepted. So the middle way that the Buddha was talking about was not just a middle way between indulgence and asceticism, but was this middle way of the view of reality. This is what Nagarjuna was writing about. So his text, I'll again say, his text delineates reasonings that establish an emptiness of inherent existence as the final mode of existence of all phenomena. Not with one or a few, but many examples and through many approaches in the 27 chapters of that text. His Holiness has begun to teach in recent years Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way. Have you heard in some set of lectures? Sometimes, did you hear, Jeffrey, any of the Dalai Lama's teachings on that text? Anyone else? Sometimes. You may have, if you haven't, you can find sometime on the Dalai Lama's website, dalailama.com. You can hear some lectures, or you can find, I think, on YouTube. And get familiar with that. As the great teachers say, to really understand emptiness, if you get down to it, you have to have some understanding of these great treatises. Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka Shastra, or Chandrakirti's, the other main one we refer to is Chandrakirti's entry into the middle way, the Madhyamaka Avatara. Without understanding, having studied that a little bit, it's very difficult to really get a good understanding of emptiness. You can have a lot of casual courses here and there, and you need to have that kind of courage to be able to, when we talk about different kinds of patience, one of the kinds of patience is the patience to endure the difficulties of understanding the Dharma. Something like, to undergo the study of the meaning of emptiness and so forth. So in Nagarjuna's text, the Four Noble Truths, the two truths, what are the two truths? Which end do you know? What are they? Yeah, usually we say the conventional truth and ultimate truth. Four truths, the two truths, nirvana, production, perception, all of these different things, not all of these, 27 different things are analyzed in the 27 chapters. So you can find, if you really say, how does emptiness relate to production or to the 12 links or to the two truths or the four truths? There are chapters devoted to analyzing those from the point of view of emptiness in those 27 chapters. So obviously not everything is covered, but 27 main things. In his treatise, Nagarjuna treats the two truths even more extensively than Chandrakirti does in Chandrakirti's text. Chandrakirti's text is considered to be, in some ways, a supplement to Nagarjuna's text. Was Chandrakirti the same time as Nagarjuna? Do any of you know? No? He was maybe a couple hundred years later, but he was considered to be a student of Nagarjuna, maybe because he followed very precisely Nagarjuna's texts, or maybe because Nagarjuna lived several hundred years and he was an actual student of Nagarjuna. Different views. If you believe that Nagarjuna did live several hundred years, some Westerners today think, oh, that's impossible. There's just Buddhist, what do they call it, hagiography or something, exaggerations about, maybe possible. At any rate, Chandrakirti's text elaborated in more detail about some things in Nagarjuna's text, but still Nagarjuna treated the two truths in his fundamental treatise even more extensively than Chandrakirti does in the Madhyamaka. So the Madhyamaka Shastra, Nagarjuna's text, taught the nature of the two truths, taught that if one does not know the two truths, one does not know the essence of Buddhist scriptures. He taught the purpose of teaching the two truths, taught the faults of misconceiving the two truths, and taught because the two truths are difficult to realize, the Buddha did not teach them at the very beginning. Nowadays, generally, what was the first teaching the Buddha gave? Do you remember? Did he teach about the Four Noble Truths, right? That's the general accessibility to the teachings. But for people today, the Dalai Lama has said, sometimes the approach, which was not appropriate at the time of teaching the two truths, from the beginning might be a way for people, 21st century people. I was going to say 20th century. I was born way back in the 20th century. I guess most of you were also. Anyone here who's less than 19 or less? No, I don't think so. 20th, 21st century people, maybe to be introduced to the two truths as an entryway to Buddhism makes sense to our scientific minds. So here's a little bit of introduction to these 5 points, what Nagarjuna said about the two truths, because this is giving an idea to give an overview of the Madhyamaka system. In the very first verse, in the 24th chapter, the 8th verse, this is the first point, Nagarjuna said something like this: doctrines taught by the Buddhas rely wholly on the two truths, worldly conventional truths and ultimate truths. So he began to, here he was talking about the two truths. So what are truths? Is interesting. What do you think? What is true? If you talk about truths as some category, what are truths? Truths are objects that exist the way they appear. Would you agree that's a good definition? Something is true if it actually exists the way that it appears. So the general category of truths are those things that exist in the way that they appear. Like what's it called? Santa Claus. I'm trying to think of some other example. Santa Claus may appear to be this jovial fellow in a green suit with a white beard. Is it happen at Christmas here, or is it just only in America? Do you know what Santa Claus is? Okay, this is not just America. Maybe in the mall you bring your kids to see Santa Claus. So Santa Claus doesn't exist the way he appears. It's not a truth, right? You give an example. Or the neighbor who really wants to move his fence every couple of weeks a little closer on your property, making his property larger, who smiles at you when you see him. That's an example of not a truth. That's like someone giving a false impression as a friend, you know. Truths are objects that exist the way they appear. Thus, conventional objects are truths only in the sense that they seem to exist the way they appear for ignorant consciousness. So really, of the two truths, only one of the two truths is actually truths. What are those? Ultimate truths. They are the only things that actually exist the way that they appear. Conventional truths are called truths because for an ignorant consciousness still under the influence of grasping to an inherent existence, they are true. They seem to exist the way they appear for that ignorant consciousness, a consciousness which is called a concealer of suchness, a concealer. This ignorant consciousness is called a concealer of reality. That Sanskrit word is samvriti. Have you ever heard of, you know the term in Sanskrit for conventional truth? It's called samvriti satya. Tibetans, you may know from your class, kunsop demba is usually how they translate it. Kunsop means concealer. Some of the kids are taking the final exam in the basic program, so they may be more familiar with this. When we talk about conventional truth, it's referring to this word samvriti satya. Satya means truth. Samvriti has different etymologies, but one of the main ones means it's a concealing consciousness. It's an ignorant consciousness that prevents us from seeing reality by concealing it. You know what I mean by concealing? Do you know it prevents you from seeing? Conventional objects are truths only in the sense that they seem to exist the way they appear for an ignorant consciousness, a concealer of reality through conceiving phenomena to exist inherently. So that basic ignorance we've been talking about, that Nagarjuna says is the root of cyclic existence, the ignorance that's grasping to inherent existence that we all have within our continua, our mental continua. For a mind under the influence of that ignorance, conventional truths exist the way that they appear. Actually, they are appearing as though they could be found within their bases of designation. That Wichin could somehow, that there is a real Wichin somewhere there behind his aggregates. So conventional truths are not, although they're called truths, they're not actually truths. Okay, does that come as a shock to you? Okay.
It's kind of self-defining in the way you explain it.
Well, is the way that that the Buddha explained, Nagarjuna is explaining here. I'm ignorant. I'm not. I'm just repeating what others have said. Hence, all objects other than emptinesses, all objects except emptinesses, here we're using the plural, are conventional truths. Or another way called conventional truths, truths for a concealer, truths for an ignorant mind. Jeffrey Hopkins at one point, he coined a phrase, truths for jerks. You know what a jerk is? Do you use that expression? Like someone who's dumb, oh, he's a jerk, doesn't know anything. So conventional truths are truths for a jerk. And he's just making it more accessible. Truths for an ignorant consciousness, that part of us that is a jerk. Does that offend you in any way? Truths for a concealer. An emptiness, however, is a truth because it exists the way it appears to direct perception. It appears to be non-inherently existent, and it is non-inherently existent. Other phenomena, conventional truths, appear to be inherently existent, but are actually, the way they actually exist is the opposite. They are actually empty of that. Oh, they appear other things too. They appear to be, conventional truths appear to be impermanent, perhaps, or to appear to be, quote, beautiful or ugly or tasty or, nice smelling. Conventional truths have different ways of appearing to us, but we're talking about this fundamental, most important way that they seem to be appearing to us as though inherently existent. So from that point of view, they're not true. Conventional truths are not actually truths. And an emptiness is an ultimate truth because among phenomena, it is supreme. Since through meditating on it, you might say, why is emptiness from the Madhyamaka point of view called ultimate truth? Remember in the other tenets, there were different meanings of emptiness. There were different meanings of what was an ultimate truth and a conventional truth. Remember for the Vaibhashika, what was an ultimate truth? Something which could withstand either analysis or being broken, still kept its identity, such as partless particles. Maybe those of you who were here for those lectures. And the different tenets, there are different meanings of emptiness and ultimate truth. Here for the Madhyamaka, emptiness is the ultimate truth. Is an ultimate truth because among phenomena it is supreme, it's ultimate, since through meditating on it, the obstructions to liberation and the obstructions to omniscience are removed. Meditating on other objects other than emptiness do not remove the obstructions. You can meditate on impermanence. Will that remove the obstructions to liberation? No. You can meditate on the impurities within things that appear to be pure, like meditating on the impure substances within the body to reduce attachment and so forth, but they don't remove the obstructions from the root. Only meditating on emptiness does that, and so it's considered to be ultimate. It's an ultimate truth. And it's also called ultimate truth because it is the object of the highest wisdom. There's no wisdom beyond the wisdom of emptiness. Okay, so that's a little bit about the first point, the nature of the two truths. Then the second point that Nagarjuna was talking about, if you don't know the two truths, you don't know the essence of Buddhist scriptures. So here Jeffrey is quoting in the 24th chapter, the 9th verse. I think this is, the last one was the 8th verse of the 24th chapter. It's probably the chapter talking about the two truths. So this one says, those who do not comprehend the difference between these two truths, conventional truth, ultimate truth, do not know the nature of the profound doctrine of the Buddha. So Nagarjuna was saying all of the other presentations of the Buddhist doctrines, the lower tenets, the schools that existed at his time, if they did not understand this correct view, which he was trying to re-reveal to the world, that the Buddha had revealed in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, it's not like Nagarjuna was saying something new, but he was presenting again after his long disappearance in the world for some 400 years. Remember, at the time of the Buddha, Mahayana sutras were taught, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, maybe kind of existed in the world for about 40 years, but then began to disappear. Maybe it was not the right atmosphere. Those who do not know the difference between conventional and ultimate truths do not know the essence of Buddhist teaching, the principle of profound dependent arising. Okay, so have you heard that term, dependent arising? Sometimes we talk about, in the class we just finished yesterday, a very brief exposition about the 12 links of dependent arising or dependent origination. Dependent arising, dependent origination, just different ways of translating the same thing. They're not two different topics, right? Interdependent, codependent, arising, all different ways you can translate, but it comes down to the same thing. This is a term which bridges ultimate truth and conventional truth, that relates them. This is the essence of Buddhist teachings in just a phrase. Jeffrey Hopkins also, at one point, he made some little badges, like the little things that for elections that you put on your lapel or something. It said, the badge said something like this: dependent arising is Buddha's slogan, or something like that. Buddha's slogan, dependent arising. As though this is, what was Trump's slogan? Build a wall, right? or make America great again. MAGA, make America great again. So, different slogans that supposedly give you the essence of their position, right? So Jeffrey made this joke that, Buddha's slogan was dependent arising. Those who do not know the difference between conventional and ultimate truths, if you don't understand that, you don't know the essence of Buddhist teaching, the principle of profound dependent arising. Therefore, one who wants to know the actuality of the conqueror's teachings, the Buddhist teachings, Buddha's called the conqueror sometime. You know why? Conquered the delusions. It's not like he was a Genghis Khan or something like that, conqueror of other nations. It's called the Jina. Those who want to know the actuality, what the conqueror's teachings actually were, should comprehend the suitability of all actions, objects, and agents, independently produced and independently designated conventionalities that appear like a moon and water. Wow. So someone who understands the actual teachings of the Buddha understands that emptiness does not deny the fact of karma, causality, that our actions have results. But those results and those actions all are almost like illusion-like. Like a dream. They function, but they're empty of existing the way they appear. That view is very difficult to find, the correct view, that accepts the existence of emptiness as ultimate truth, yet conventionality still existing and functioning. One must comprehend that the very reason, the mode of the ultimate, that abandons the two extremes of inherent existence and total non-existence. I'll say that again. I think I didn't read it properly. Also, one must if you really want to understand the conqueror's teachings, you have to comprehend by that very reason the mode of the ultimate that abandons the two extremes of inherent existence and total non-existence. Okay, maybe not completely clear, but getting a little idea. Third point, the purpose of Buddhist teaching the two truths. And in fact, this is the very next verse in the 24th chapter. If you have a translation of Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way, you can check the 24th chapter on the two truths. So the next verse says, without relying on conventions or conventional truths, conventions, the ultimate cannot be taught. You can't ever even approach ultimate truth without using terminology, without using examples of conventional reality. Without relying on conventions, the ultimate cannot be taught. Without realizing the ultimate, nirvana is not attained. So you need both truths. The purpose of teaching the two truths. Those who do not know the difference between someone who says, if ultimate nature is free of dualistic elaborations, then it needs to be taught. Okay, yeah, you should teach emptiness. But what's the sense, what's the point of teaching conventionalities such as the aggregates, the five aggregates, the skandhas, the constituents, the so-called dhatus, and the sources, the ayatanas? Why teach about conventional truth? If the unreal is to be abandoned, oftentimes people think this, right? Conventionalities are not ultimately existent. There's no point in teaching it. What's the sense? So the answer is, although it is true that the erroneous, the conventionalities that appear to be real but are not, they are to be abandoned in the sense that one has to realize they don't exist the way that they appear. Yet, the ultimate cannot be taught without depending on worldly conventionalities. Here it says ultimates, worldly ultimates, such as object of expression, expressor, knowing, object to be known, and so forth. The conventions related with superior beings, the Aryas, that are asserted to be conventional truths. You can't explain emptiness without depending on conventional truths. So it's not, although they're eventually to be abandoned, you still have to depend on them even to understand the ultimate. Also, without teaching the ultimate, it cannot be realized. And without that, nirvana cannot be attained. Therefore, because of being the means of attaining liberation, just as one who wants water has need of a vessel, you need a cup or something, even your palms or even the opening of your mouth, one who has need of water, you need a vessel. So initially one definitely should assert conventionalities just as they are. So this is different than the other, other views. Conventionalities do have a function in leading us to the ultimate truth. So then this fourth point, we're just going through, the faults of misconceiving the two truths. This is the very next verse. If emptiness is viewed wrongly, those of small intellect are hurt, like wrongly holding a snake or wrongly using a spell. Do you know what that means? Wrongly holding a snake? Anyone here a snake holder? if this tuft at the end of my rosary is the head of the snake, if I were to pick up the snake from the middle of the body or near the tail, the snake could come around and bite me, right? Has that happened to you? You seem to know exactly what I was saying. Oh, you've heard the teachings before, right? You've heard an example, okay. I thought maybe you were a snake handler. What this means is, without understanding properly, if emptiness is viewed wrongly, as for instance, implying that phenomena do not exist at all, phenomena are empty, as though there's no sense of conventionality, no validity of conventionalities, no law of cause and effect. One can become immoral, think, I can do whatever I want. It's all empty, doesn't exist. And in so doing, one can ruin oneself, because creating negative karma. One can rationalize, in that sense also, that one's wrong actions are okay because they're empty. Or wrongly using a spell. If you don't use a spell correctly, this is something we don't talk about so much today. In the time of the Buddha, there was more talk about spells that magicians would do. It's never clear to me with even talking to the lamas what they understand it to be, that kind of magic. Nowadays, when you talk about magic shows, it's usually sleight of hand or some kind of misdirection, right? But magic in earlier times, there were magicians who could put a spell on the audience, maybe a hypnotic suggestion, you might say, and through energizing something like a stick or a stone with some mantra. So this spell may then, because it's energized with a mantra, may imply that you're dealing with some spirit. The magician was using some spirit also. By energizing the stone or stick, or through their own concentration, you can cause the stone to appear as an elephant or a horse or something. That was what was called magic illusion. Nowadays, when we talk about, the shows in Las Vegas or in, what's the thing in France? I can't remember. There's some kind of magic shows. These are not dealing with hypnotizing the audience or using a spell or perhaps using a spirit to make some kind of appearance. But in the time of the Buddha, that's generally was what was meant by magic. So here, if you wrongly use a spell, it can come back and harm you. So it says, if emptiness is viewed wrongly, those with small intellect are hurt, like wrongly holding a snake or wrongly using a spell. So a little bit explanation of this. A yogi who realizes that conventional truths produced merely through ignorance do not inherently exist. So this is talking about a yogi who's like what we've been trying to do. The way that the eye seems to appear, using logic to understand that it does not exist that way, having an insight into emptiness. A yogi who realizes that conventional truths produced merely through ignorance do not inherently exist. So still, when they awake from that meditative equipoise, conventional things appear merely through ignorance, realizes their ultimate emptiness. That kind of yogi will not fall into the two extremes. For that yogi does not conceive that an objectively existent nature, which formerly existed, now does not exist, doesn't fall into that extreme. That's something that once existed as objectively existent, truly existent, inherently existent, that it can go out of existence, become non-existent. Also because that yogi has not damaged or refuted worldly conventions that are like reflections. He or she has not damaged actions and their results. So he or she, the yogi that realizes emptiness, does not refute the conventionalities of the world. Such a yogi also does not falsely superimpose ultimate existence on phenomena, here using the male here, because he has seen that actions and their fruits can occur only in non-inherently existent things. This is something we haven't talked about. If something inherently existed the way that our minds conceive them to be, the logical implication would be that they could not bring about any change. They would inherently exist independent of other things. They could not bring about change in anything else because they were completely inherently existent independent of others. So these yogis who realize emptiness, who see that all phenomena do not inherently exist, without perceiving such a difference between the two truths, either think that things do not exist or impute true existence to emptiness, and thereby think that things inherently exist as bases of emptiness. These are both wrong ways of viewing emptiness, and in this way, those of little intellect are hurt by wrongly apprehending emptiness. So another way of saying this is, one misapprehension about emptiness also, not only that it refutes existence, is that somehow emptiness really exists, almost like it's findable there, independent of conventional phenomena. In the Heart Sutra, the one famous verse in that, form is empty, emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form. There is a kind of a expression about this. Emptiness as an ultimate truth and form as an example of conventional truth are not two disparate things, independent things, as though you could understand the emptiness of form without understanding form. They are, form and its emptiness are of one nature. Have you heard that before? They're one nature, but they're different conceptually. They're said to be different isolates, so to speak, conceptual things. Ultimate truth and conventional truth. So if you were to misunderstand the meaning of emptiness to mean that conventionalities don't exist, that's one extreme. They don't exist at all. Other extreme is to think, for instance, that emptiness inherently exists. It could be understood without understanding the conventionality that it is the emptiness of. Emptiness doesn't exist as some, phenomena out there independent of other things. It's interrelated with conventional phenomena. Okay, I won't go into more detail. Then the next verse says, therefore realizing that the dull-witted would have trouble understanding this doctrine, the mind of the subduer, another name for the Buddha, the Muni. We call Shakyamuni Buddha. You know why he's called the Muni? The sage of the Shakya clan. All of these different names, epithets for the Buddha came about after his birth, when he was growing up. At one point, at the plowing ceremony around May, here the seasons are more or less the same, but in India, before you planted the rice, there's a plowing season. Even that has in Europe and so forth. There's always something in the springtime, some rites of fertility and so forth. So the king, his father, was plowing the first plow of the land with the oxen and the golden plow to sort of indicate now everyone else should begin to plow the land and they could plant their seeds. Shakyamuni was Siddhartha was a young boy. He sat under a tree in meditation while all this was going on, all the festival was going on for many hours. So the people said, wow, look at him. He's a real sage. Even during that time, it's said that the shadow of the tree never left him, maybe through some magic power or something. But he became known at that point as the Muni of the Shakya clan. So he was called Shakyamuni. So, therefore, realizing that the dull-witted would have trouble understanding this doctrine of emptiness, the mind of the Muni turned away from teaching doctrine. What does that mean? Didn't teach doctrine? Didn't teach emptiness? No, he taught it. When he began to teach, he taught it even when he taught the Four Noble Truths. But did the Buddha immediately after taking the aspect of achieving enlightenment, did he begin to teach immediately? What was it? How many weeks did he stay walking around Bodh Gaya, do you know? Was it 7 weeks, something like that, 49 days? Jeffrey, was it? You remember? Something like that. And maybe they were emanations of his own mind, but he was requested by Indra and Brahma. Indra is the king of the highest being of the desire realm gods, right? There are different levels of the desire realm devas. Indra is considered to be like the capo, the tutti capi. I'm being facetious. Brahma is considered to be the head of the four realms of the form realm. So they came and told the Buddha that he shouldn't refrain from teaching. There were some beings whose wisdom eyes were only slightly covered by ignorance. The Buddha knew this. He was omniscient. He was taking the aspect of also reminding us that when we want to receive teachings, we have to request them for various reasons. We have to eliminate the karmic obscurations in our minds to receive the teachings by requesting them. Since one who views emptiness wrongly is harmed, and since those of little intelligence cannot apprehend the meaning of suchness correctly, after enlightenment, Shakyamuni, when he saw the dispositions of sentient beings and the great profundity of the doctrine, knew that those of little intellect could not realize the depth of the profound doctrine of dependent origination, dependent arising. Therefore, his mind turned away from teaching. In fact, this very act of turning away, at first for 49 days, 7 weeks, is accepted as being his, still is this accepted as being his first teaching, even before the Four Noble Truths. For this, his pretended retreat from teaching indicated the profundity of his doctrine and thereby generated interest. Wow, that's very interesting. Have you ever heard that? This is sometimes considered his first teaching, not the Four Noble Truths, his hesitancy to teach for these 7 weeks. It's a little bit like generating interest. The politicians generate interest by, doing something a little bit, bizarre. I remember there was a coffee, I think it's still manufactured, called Folgers coffee. Has anyone heard of Folgers? At one time in Chicago, where I was a boy, there was this big advertising campaign. Colonel Folgers is bringing a mountain to Chicago. I was like, what is this all about? He said, generating interest. It was like Colonel Folgers was bringing a mountain of coffee beans to sell the coffee in Chicago. So so this was his pretended retreat from teaching. Pretended? The Buddha was pretending? Buddha was omniscient. He knew exactly what would happen in the future and so forth. All of this was already understood, but he pretended to retreat from teaching that indicated that the profundity of his doctrine and thereby generated interest. So in Chandrakirti's text, he didn't treat all of these topics in Chandrakirti's text, the Madhyamavatara. Which is, that Madhyamavatara is therefore less extensive than Nagarjuna's treatise, although Chandrakirti's text is actually larger than Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom. So there's two texts. Chandrakirti wrote root verses, or karikas, the Madhyamakavatara karika. He also wrote a commentary to that, an auto commentary, Madhyamakavatara Bhashyam. Indian word Bhashyam means the author's own commentary on his root verses. Nagarjuna just wrote the root verses to his fundamental wisdom, but even those root verses, Chandrakirti's root verses, is a slightly longer text. Still, Nagarjuna, in his fundamental wisdom, that's what the text is sometimes called, treated many more topics, implied many more things. A work is extensive not because of a great number of words, because Chandrakirti's text is larger in words, but because of covering many topics. For instance, Maitreya's Abhisamaya Alamkara, the ornament for clear realization, is very short, but its meanings are very, very vast. It's talking about all of the bodhisattva's deeds and the emptiness of those deeds and so forth. Therefore, Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way is more extensive than Chandrakirti's longer supplement because it's teaching more subjects. So if you get a chance to study or to hear teachings on Nagarjuna's text, I would recommend that very, very, very highly. And I keep on forgetting the timing. It ends at 12? Yeah. Yesterday I was about 20 minutes over, and I said, we still have 10 minutes left, and people say, no, you're 20 minutes, already 20 minutes over. So, okay, so we do have a couple of minutes left. Any question about what we're presenting so far? Yeah. You project your voice well, so he doesn't have to bring the microphone.
You mentioned that there's always a risk of misapprehending the meaning of emptiness and equating it to phenomena that's non-existent.
Yeah, sometimes people might, just by the term empty,
Yes.
yeah, it sounds like things don't exist.
Yeah, so that's my very point, is that I always felt that emptiness was never a very good choice of word to describe conceptually what one is trying to portray. But then if that's emptiness is kind of the best translation from the Sanskrit or Tibetan, is there also the same, not ambiguity, but the same risk of misunderstanding from the Sanskrit or the Tibetan word?
Well, emptiness is not a Tibetan word; it's an English word, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But
So, so let me say a little bit first, and then you can if this doesn't cover what you're asking, you can ask again. So the word in Sanskrit for emptiness, do you know what it is? What's the word? You know, come on. Shunyata. Shunyata. In the Pali Canon, you don't find the word shunyata used more than once or twice in a couple of disparate places. It's not really covered. The word shunya, like shunya and shunyata, empty and emptiness. The word shunya is used a little bit in the Pali Canon. And when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, we talk about the person is empty, is the word shunya is used to refer to empty of being permanent, partless, and independent, or permanent, is empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent. But that's not called shunyata. Shunyata means the state of being empty. Okay? So what's the sense in the Buddha used the word shunya and shunyata. What's the sense of that word? Did he kind of make a mistake? Because we've translated it into English sometimes as emptiness. Does Alan translate shunyata indifferent than the word emptiness? Does he have another modern psychological word? No? Generally, it's accepted. But good point. The word shunya in Sanskrit has the sense of this, like something that looks bulbous, like a big balloon, but it actually, even though it looks like substantial or like a water bubble, that you can see the reflection of the sunlight coming off in rainbow colors. You know, when you make a big soap bubble, you know, kids run after it like there's something really there that's fun, it's floating. But when they touch it, what happens? You realize that there was nothing there. It was just a thin coating. So the sense of shunya in Sanskrit, there are other words that have a similar meaning of empty, but Buddha chose this because the Sanskrit word had this sense of something that seemed to be there but was actually empty. So we don't have an English word that has exactly that same connotation. So the critique of the word emptiness is a good critique because it might just by the word, by the way it resonates to our consciousness along with our historical, psychological context of 21st century people, it might sound like it's totally negating something. But the sense of shunya and shunyata is that there's something that's appearing there, like the water bubble or like the balloon. But if you get into the essence of it, within, there's nothing there. It looks like something. So that's, to me, that's a pretty good, if you understand that meaning of shunya, that's pretty good indication that things appear to be one way, but but if you get to the essence of it, that apparent solidity or findability or inherent existence is not really there. Okay? So having said that, do you still have some question about the term?
Well, are you able to think of a better term?
I am not. I am not able to think of a better term. That's why I was asking if sometimes people, sometimes some presenters of Buddhism over the last couple of decades in the West have also picked up on that Western anxiety about using emptiness, and they say, "Oh no, that's a bad word to use. You should say wholeness or something, as though, or openness, as though shunyata means openness in the sense that everything's possible. You know, open enrollment, anyone can come. You know, openness." But I think the Buddha was pretty savvy, pretty sage. He was called the sage of the Shakya clan, after all, the Shakyamuni. He was omniscient, after all, is omniscient. Can I say that? He was omniscient? He is omniscient? It's a Buddhist mind stream continues to the present. So it's something to think about in terms of Western word. It might be something else. If you get a very extensive thesaurus and see if you can find other synonyms of empty or open and see if something else fits. But the word shunya, if you look in the Sanskrit dictionary, one of the things is empty. Shunyata, the state of being empty or emptiness. Okay, let's end with that. And, okay, quick. Yeah. Okay, this word that I slipped in there that she noticed. Some of you didn't know, some of you noticed. isolate what that means. It's just, we'll talk about more then. So let's just quickly, like the Tibetans have some rituals they do on horseback, like a consecration of the stupa that is so brief that you can do on horseback. So we'll do a dedication on horseback, very brief. Due to these merits that I've just created this morning, may they ripen in such a way that they bring about my continued spiritual development up into and including enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings.